July 26, 2021. Can we have a roll call, please?
Yes, Director Slater Carter,
Present.
Director Penrose. I don't see her in yet.
She'll be joining us, I'm sure.
Probably, yes. Director Clark,
Present.
Director Lohman,
Here.
Director Ruddock,
Here.
Chair Dye.
Here.
Okay,
And also, can you introduce the staff who are here, please?
There's Director Penrose.
Great. Director Penrose.
okay. We'll finish our roll call. Director Penrose,
Here.
roll call. Good. She got her in. Okay, so all present. I'd like to introduce
the staff, please.
Yes, I'd like to introduce my staff. We have Susie from the administration department. Then we have George Evans, a finance officer, a finance and accounts. We have Tim Costello, supervisor, treatment and field operations. He's got a long title. Then we have Sonia, who's our operator from the treatment plant. And then we have David Partida as an operator again from the wastewater, from the plant. We have Felipe, who's a collection worker. You don't see him, but you can see that his name is there displayed. We have TJ Hussain, who's our collection maintenance mechanic. Then we have Tony Young, collections. I presume along with Tony, we also have Angelo there. I believe both of them are sharing the tablet there. We don't see them though, but he's at the background. Oh, I do see Angelo. Yes, Angelo is there by himself. We have Angelo too, collections. And then my name is Kishan Prativadi. I'm the general manager. And then we have Jeremy Ungrais. He's our general counsel. I believe I've covered everyone, whoever is on display here. Pardon me if I've missed out anybody, but I guess I have covered everything.
Christopher.
I'm sorry?
Sorry, Christopher. Yep, our special counsel.
And then we have 2 employee anniversaries. Can you discuss that for us?
Yes. The first one is Felipe. So who's going to do the Felipe things? Tony?
I think he's sticking me with it.
Okay.
But that's
Susie.
okay. Okay, so Felipe is a very hard worker. He's ready to jump in and get things done. And if something comes up, he's always willing to try to find a solution to, fix whatever the issue is. He's got a great attitude, always has a smile, always makes us laugh. And he is a really fantastic guy, and we're lucky we have him. So Felipe, thank you very much for your dedication to the staff here at SAM and SAM. We love you.
So, yes. And Felipe is with our collections department, which is the people who go out and solve problems in the various, the other 3 areas. And they work at, they clean the systems, and they're part of our contract with SAM to take care of cleaning the lines in all 3 agencies, right? And then our remaining employee anniversary is of our general manager, Kishan Prathavadi, and who is going to tell us about Kishan?
Well, as a matter of fact, before I lead off with that, seeing as how Tony decided to pass off his duties to Susie, open up a related joke. And don't worry, Susie, I'm not passing this off to you.
Yay!
Seinfeld told a joke. He starts off with asking everybody, what's your biggest fear? And of course, the number 1 answer from everybody is death. He says, well, you're very close. That's the number 2 biggest fear people have. Number 1, public speaking. So Jerry expands. If you're at a funeral, you're better off in the casket than you are at the podium, giving the eulogy. So it is with that background that Susie got to deliver tonight's speech. And I am going to say a few words about Kishan. Kishan, we're very happy to have you here. Of course, 6 years ago in July of 2015, you started as an engineer. I'm not going to address the years you were here as an engineer because I'm not qualified. But as a fellow employee, I believe I am qualified, as all the other employees here are also qualified to speak to our appreciation that you stepped up to volunteer to be GM at a time that was very tough for Sam and its employees. We're very grateful that you did that. And we want to extend our thanks also to the board. You saw something in Kishan that we saw, his character, his personality. That's what makes him a superb GM. And we also are grateful that you've extended his contract for another 2 years. And that is how we view our leader. He's created an environment where we all feel Sam is a team, and we appreciate it. And with that, thank you, Kishan. Thank you, board. And thank you, team members that are here representing.
Yeah, woo!
Well said, George. Thank you very much.
And now
Anyone
I'll
else?
mute.
Okay. All right. Anything else?
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your kind words, George. And I would like to thank the staff. It's, without this wonderful team, I'm sure I wouldn't have been able to get this 6 years passing through so smoothly. And with the team support, with the confidence that they have in me, and of course, with the guidance and support from the board, I really thank staff as well as the board for having, put up with me for this 6 years. And I don't know how long they'll have to put up with me, but well, I'm for it. Thank you.
Well said, Kishan. Thank you. And congratulations on 6 good years.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to public comment. Do we have any members of the public who would like to speak to items not on the agenda?
Nope, I haven't received any email. If somebody wants to speak, then that'll be fine.
I don't see anyone. So moving on to the consent agenda. Can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So move. Second.
All right, is there any further discussion on that? Anyone want to remove anything? Anyone have any concerns? All right, can we call a question? Have a roll call, please?
Director Slater Carter,
Aye.
Director Penrose,
Yes.
Director Clark. Director Clark, you're muted.
Yes. Aye.
Director Lohman,
Yes.
Director Radek,
Yes.
Chair Slater Carter.
Aye.
Oops.
Or its chair died.
Sorry. Chair died.
It's fine. She was the previous chair. I get
I'm
it.
sorry. I was not thinking properly. I'm so sorry. Yep.
Where were you?
Motion passed. Yep. Chair die.
Well, you never asked me.
I asked you. Chair die. Okay. Sorry.
Yes. Okay. Moving on. Regular business.
Yep.
Discussion on the technical memorandum from Brown and Caldwell on wastewater treatment plant capacity and treatment process review study. Kishan, can you tell us about this?
Yes. So last year in the month of October, that is October 2020, Sam experienced abnormally high biochemical oxygen demand, in short, which is known as BOD. And these levels shot up in the influent. And these BOD levels upset the plant process and resulted in discharge of non-compliant effluent by the plant. Abnormal BOD levels continued and appeared throughout the remainder of 2020. The plant was still able to meet the discharge requirements in November and December. But in view of these process upsets, the board, along with Sam's staff, decided that we should send out a request for proposal to qualified engineering consultants who can possibly do a plant process study and suggest some improvements in the plant to take care of such upsets. And we did send out the RFP. Brown and Caldwell turned out to be the most, most qualified and best consultant during that time, whoever had responded to the RFP. So therefore, Brown Caldwell initiated the work by conducting an on-site kickoff meeting. And after that, they had several visits to the plant. We had several workshops with staff members. And at present, Brown and Caldwell is going to present a draft technical memorandum to the board and to the public about what all improvements would be required at SAM in order to, face these process upsets. And therefore, I would request Brown and Caldwell to go ahead and do their presentation. And of course, SAM staff will also be present to answer any questions.
Thank you, Kishan. I wanted to introduce, I feel like old hat. This is my third time, I think, in front of the board, so I'm getting to be familiar. My name is Mike Harrison. I'm the project manager. And I have also on board is Linda Sawyer. Linda's our national process engineer, and she was a big help on developing this report. I understand the report we sent is massive. I know it's a lot of exciting reading, but what I did here is to highlight some of the things that we came up with so that you guys can kind of ask questions. And as usual, please just, if I can't see you, raise a hand. I don't have any problem with you saying, hey, I have a question. I'll just run through this. The first thing that I want to just talk about is what our agenda was. And again, I wanted to preface that this is really we're focusing on this workshop really is presenting the plant improvements, the optimizations that we're looking at the plant. As you know, there's other challenges, collection system and operations, but this is really the focus is on the plant improvements that would be needed. So that's the first thing. I'll lay out really what was in the TM, but I've distilled it down for really comparison and for your input. And the agenda is as follows. We'll talk about costs. Costs are a big deal. So we'll present our assumptions for cost estimating so you get some context with our costs. We'll go over each of the alternatives that we looked at. These are we're consistent with when we proposed to SAM about what we would look at. So we basically looked at those and we will prepare, we'll show a construction cost breakdown so you get an idea where the costs are being allocated for each of these alternatives. We'll go through some pros and cons, and then we'll pivot on capacity, because that's really the thing is, what is your plant capacity? What are you able to take? And then we'll summarize it. We'll do a comparative summary with some of the risks with each of these alternatives, and then we'll present our recommendations. And then finally, next steps. What are we doing after this? So that's our agenda. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was our cost estimating assumptions. We did construction costs. So we have on our team construction estimators. So we prepared these construction costs, but they're not project costs, and I'll qualify. So construction costs is what you're paying a contractor, but the overall project cost, which is what you would be paying for, includes some other, I'll call it soft costs. And typically that's a 30 to 35% increase. And that includes, in the next slide, I'll show you the breakdown. The level of estimate, class 5, what that means is, the more accurate your information, the better estimate you can make. So for this type of study, we haven't designed anything yet. We have really high level conceptual, layouts, but we do have some good quotes. So there's a plus or minus, and I just want to keep you an idea that, it's pretty wide at this point, but the number we give you is pretty reasonable. So that's one of the things that we want to make sure, that we just make sure you're aware of. And then finally, the costs are kind of current dollars, right? So that's like if you built it this year, we didn't project out because we don't know when that would happen. So that's one thing which is consistent with when I talked with Kishan about how you do that. So there would be some escalation if you linger on and it goes out 2 years because of just inflation costs and those things. So those are some of the assumptions we made. I mentioned the markups, and this is typically kind of a fuzzy, but this is our 35%, what we typically have. And again, a project's not just the contractor building it, but you have administration that's borne by the agency oversight, the planning environmental. Again, there's a lot of support things that need to be done. And then design and construction management, all those things are put together. It's around 35%. So I wanted to give you an idea that that's about what you would be adding on as percentage to any construction costs that you do. And it does vary, but it's a good benchmark at this point for purposes of planning. So I wanted to talk through each of the alternatives. We originally presented, question?
Well,
Nope, okay.
are you going to go through? It seems like this is kind of backwards. That you're first talking about cost parameters and like assuming, I don't know, I feel like we need to have a discussion of what your work has shown us about what's going on at the plant and why changes are needed and so forth, instead of just like high cost alternatives for changes. Okay. I mean, so this is the presentation of what we need to spend money on without going through why we need to make these changes and why this will help us deal with some of the issues that we're facing right now.
Yeah, well, we're going to get to that. I just wanted to give you some context on costs. So you have an understanding when you see them. But no, we'll definitely explain why, and we'll get to that when we talk about capacities and some of the risks that are born and all the violations that are happening now. So we'll definitely get into that for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we lay out the underlying assumptions
Yes.
and understand those. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Great.
It feels like we're jumping to the end and we're not doing the explanation of what's going on and why changes may be necessary, and we're jumping just like we have to spend a whole bunch of money. So okay, I mean, let's go. Let's see your presentation.
Sure.
But I want to just register that concern.
So I would highlight the violations that have occurred in October as really the cause, and that's why we got on board, was to take a look at that. So your plant needs improvements to weather those changes and some of the things that are happening. So that's really the basis of these improvements or modifications or optimizations that we're talking about. All right, so I'll start with the alternatives. So the first one is really,
can you jump to why we need to make changes?
I could, certainly.
Yeah, I think Michael, just maybe to be helpful here, I think the board understands there's been past issues, but I think they're trying to understand, what problem are we trying to solve? We have exceedances. How does your solution that will cost a certain amount of money solve those problems?
Yeah. So this is a pretty, really a snapshot of your facility. So I'll take you through this. Your loading, the black line there is your kind of average loading that you're trending with. So plus or minus, that's the level. That's pounds per day of BOD that we've talked about. And on the left, the very left side is what you have. So you need to improve to maintain the capacity to meet that. So if you have your basin 3 online or 1 and 2 online, you're not able to meet it. And that's why you have some of the operational issues with challenges. That in addition to collection
can I
system.
just ask, isn't it true that Basin 3 has operated for 20 years with no problem?
Probably.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, not quite. And let me add that current loading that's shown there is based on data from 2019. If you look at the data since last October, it's quite a bit higher than that. So, aeration basin.
Deal with the current problem. I'm not disagreeing with that, but I just want to make sure we look at this with the right perspective. Thanks.
So, part of what I was asked to do as the process engineer is like take a fresh look at what the capacity of this would be rated. Now, when we rate a treatment plant, we're not trying to rate it right on the edge of the cliff. Like a lot of the time you'll be able to function even if you're a little over that, but not consistently. And so then you get violations. So when we rate this and we use sort of a standard set of tools to do these calculations on what we think you should be able to do, we come to the result that you're in trouble with what you have now. And that's fairly consistent with the way the plant has been performing.
And things have changed in the inflow
Correct.
over the last 30 years in the characteristics of what the material that's coming into SAM the water and other stuff is. And so just because Basin 3 worked 30 years ago and 25 and 20 and so on doesn't mean with the changes in businesses and industry on the coast that things haven't changed.
And I guess on what I'm saying is I would like a presentation on how things have changed that affect what we're doing and why we have this problem. Uh, that's what I'm asking. I'm just surprised we are where we are. But keep going. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I mean, the way we started was really focusing, with what we were initially slated to do for SAM was to really look at the capacity of the plant, number one, and look at the data, what's coming in, and really disseminate how the plant's working. And also look at operations and see how the operation was. That's why when the last presentation, Lance was there. So that's part of it. But this is just a piece. You need to look at the collection system. I mentioned at the last board meeting that unless you can guarantee what comes into the plant, you need to make sure you have a handle on that. And another thing to talk about is, this is kind of an average dry weather load or loading that we show. Not only has it changed, but the variability and when it comes in, all those things factor into why the plant gets upsets. So, in order to counteract that, you do two things. You can figure out and control what's coming in, or you make improvements to the plant so you don't have violations. So the big objective is to make this an operable plant that's robust, that can handle this variability. And this was the exercise that we did, that we were presenting as the capacity analysis. A lot of effort went into that. And it's predictable based on the data. So we had to spend a big effort to do this because you need to know what you're able to treat to start with. So that was really what this alternative is. As an engineer, you need to do something. The problem's not gonna go away. There's some changes that need to be addressed. So that's what we're trying to do here, is figure out the solution. So that's kind of what we wanted to do.
And you have some slides that show us what the changes are?
Yeah, so each of these alternatives are potential changes. If you look at it, what things can you do at the plant to address this? And so those are what these alternatives that are here we're showing to meet it. Because right now you don't have the capacity. So the treatment is not sufficient right now, even though it was for 25 years, there's been some changes. So that's kind of the basis for this. So that was kind of the start of it, but this is kind of the punchline here, but I'll go back up and kind of show you what we looked at for you. It's really the best way to do it. And the way we analyzed this was to look at all the different risks and try to put it in a way that makes sense and what's the most efficient for the agency. So.
Yeah. Hey, Mike, could you address as to how the BOD, ADWL pounds per day is arrived at on the left-hand side, that is on the y-axis, what you mentioned? It is explain how it is BOD times the flow times 8.34 and what have you assumed for an average BOD so that people understand more of BOD coming into the plant as 400, 500. So they may not be very conversant with these 1,000 numbers, 4,000, 5,000. You could just elaborate a little more.
Yeah, so it's based on concentration or loading and the flow. So they're what you typically look at, but as process people, we like to use pounds. Linda, do you want to do a little treatise on just the kind of the basis for that? So I don't want to mess it up. So I want to make sure it's clear to everybody that's presenting.
Yeah. So if you can see up there on the top, it says that this is based on a concentration of 340 milligrams per liter of BOD. So I know you've been hearing numbers in terms of concentration. The challenge with concentration is that the flow also matters, and we need to understand both of those. And so when we start looking at an activated sludge system, what really matters is how many pounds of BOD come in. So I could have a higher flow and a lower concentration and have the same number of pounds. I mean, if you think of it like, if you think of like sugar water, if I take a big glass of water and a tiny bit of sugar, or I take a tiny glass of water and a little bit of sugar, I have the same amount of sugar, but the concentration is going to be really different. And so what I actually care about is that pounds, that total mass, not just the concentration. So that's why we've put this in terms of loading. And so that one of the things that you all know is flow has been going down, and this has been happening all over California, that the flows are lower and the concentrations are higher. Now, when I looked back in time as far as I could, which was somewhere around 2010, I think I managed to find some data, so maybe almost a decade from your plant, the average loading stayed fairly consistent from 2010 until 2019, and then it went up. And so the last year, it definitely has trended higher. If you can figure out where that's coming from, you may be able to get back down to this level that we're showing here. And that's accounting for sort of all of these changes in flow.
Does that kind of help a little bit?
That's helpful. I just wish we'd started with that, with the, anyway, go on.
So I'm going to go kind of back and talk about the alternatives. Bear with me here. So we had three main alternatives, and each alternative is really a direction on where you want to make improvements to your basins. So on the right here is our first alternative that we looked at, and I'll call it kind of the status quo, or where you're at. You know, basin 3 right now is currently operating, and this alternative would be putting in basin 4 in service. You have a basin that's there next to it that's not outfitted with diffusers. So the plan would be to outfit that basin so you get the capacity, and then also you have 1 and 2 as a backup. So like you have now, you don't have an ability right now to run the flow through all the basins because of the gates and some of the logistics. But this is the first alternative we looked at. So essentially it's outfitting basin 4 with diffusers to act as a similar basin as basin 3. And in basin 1 and 2, all you're doing is you're making it possible to bring flow there easily with a flow split. So the scope, we mentioned the scope on that, fine bubble diffusers, piping to bring air into the basin, basically outfitting the basin with all the equipment needed to function. And so in the bottom is the cost, construction cost estimate for this alternative. And again, plus or minus, but it's basically what you need to do this alternative.
So can you explain why 1 and 2 can't be, which is what they just used in conjunction with 3? I understand that there's a reason why 1 and 2 cannot be used with basin 3.
Yeah, it's 1 and 2 right now is minimally functioning, has different volumes, and it uses coarse bubble diffusers. So to run both in parallel is operationally about as risky as, you know, driving at night without headlights. So it's real difficult to really tune that in. It's okay for the interim, you know, for short term to do it, but it's not something that would be a long-term operational use of using 1, 2, and 3 without modifying 1 and 2 with fine bubble diffusers. So it's basically a apples to apples basins. Otherwise, you have different types of basins, different aeration rates doing all 3. So that's the main reason. Operation wise, it would be very difficult. And I don't know, Linda, did you have anything else to add about?
Yeah, I was going to add that right now, you actually, there's an issue with the way the flow splits, and with these gates here, that they're not functioning correctly, or I don't know all the details, Mike knows the details. But what it means is that if you try to put 1, 2, and 3 if you tried to turn them all on right now, the flow wouldn't split correctly between the basins. And that would make the process not function correctly. So one of the other things that's mentioned here is you've got to replace these weir gates here to make it so that even as a backup, you can use these for a short period of time. It's not recommended that you use them all the time long term. They're really kind of not ideal. But even just to be able to use them a short period, you need to replace those gates. And that's how the plant was originally designed, assuming the capacity had 1, 2, and 3 all in service. And that's part of what we're getting at here, is that when we do that rigorous analysis, just basin 3, the plant has done a great job over the years to get by the way they have with just that basin in service.
Yeah. Any more questions on this one?
I had
Yeah.
a question. If the board were to authorize alternative one, why would it solve the problem?
You gain capacity, reliability, but it's going to solve the capacity issue. You still need to look and figure out in the collection system, because what you size is there's some variability that's inherent, but the massive peaks and things that come in, that would be a challenge. So we still recommend we need to kind of get a better handle on the collection system, but this would gain the capacity that you need to address the variability in BOD loads that are coming in.
The nice thing about this is that Basin 4 is a newer basin. And if you can have Basin 3 and 4 outfitted the same, you've just doubled the normal capacity that you've been running with. And that gives you a lot more flexibility and the ability to deal with these shocks that come in. So now, from a process engineering perspective, I have to think about, I don't necessarily get to fix the collection system. So we want to make sure your plant has the capability if it gets hit with something and until you figure out what's going on. Now this will help. Now, if there's something in the collection system that's coming in that's actually really killing a lot of the bugs in the system, even more, a whole bunch more volume may still not solve the problem. So the collection system stuff definitely still has to move forward.
So okay, go on.
So this is a breakdown just on the cost that would be incurred with this. And you can see the diffuser cost is really the big one, as well as air piping. Basin 4 wasn't obviously outfitted when they built it at the time because it was for something for the future if needed. So these are the costs. E and I and C is just abbreviation for electrical and controls. You'll need some automation there to help the basins operate. Demolition, some gates, and spray piping. So this is the overall breakdown. And I want to present this comparative with the other alternatives so you can kind of take a look at it.
Can I ask a question? How much did replacing, refurbishing the fine bubble diffusers in Basin 3, what was the overall cost of that project?
I'm not sure what that cost was. Kishan, do you know?
Replacement of the fine bubble diffusers in aeration basin 3 alone?
Yes.
Yeah, that was just like a repair. Probably it was around close to 90,000 or 100,000. That's my best guess. Yep.
Yeah, so that only includes a portion of that piece that's called diffusers.
Yes.
Whereas there's a lot of additional piping just to get to where the diffusers would go in the new base in Basin 4.
I understand that.
Yeah. And this cost for diffusers was a quote from one of the known manufacturers. Again, being engineers, I mean, you'll be able to have multiple bid and things like that to get a more competitive cost. But this was one that we actually kind of used the similar manufacturer that was done for 3 just to get a quote. So that's another, kind of things to consider, when you bid the diffusers to get better costs. But yeah, there's a little bit more work just to get the basins up to that same level.
What's the demolition?
So demolition would be the removal of the gates in 1 and 2. We mentioned that you can't do the flow split, so you have to remove some of the gates. And then also, in addition to that, the basins 4 have some gates that were installed that have basically froze. So they need to be either refurbed or either demoed or rehabbed. We're not sure at this point exactly, but that's what the demolition is for that. So minor things for the cost. So it's pretty detailed estimate. Normally we wouldn't have this many line items for a class 5. So our estimator really looked at the project and got an understanding of all the things that's needed. Any other questions on the breakdown? All right.
Mike, can you go back to your previous slide, please?
Yeah.
Before the breakdown. Yeah. I'd like to elaborate a little bit on this 1, 2, 3, and 4. I know a number of questions are being asked and people have reached out to me too. I just wanted to, walk the entire thing process with the board and with the public for their information that we had the upset in October. It is true that we had only aeration basin 3 working, and that was the only basin we had. We did not have any redundant basin, and basin 3 could not be maintained for the past so many years because we didn't have any backup basin. And therefore, at that point of time, we had the process upset. We had heavy loads coming in, and basin 3, with its capacity, could not withstand the loads coming in. And therefore, we had a different group of consultants at that point of time in November who came up with the idea of switching over to 1 and 2 and keeping 3 aside, because there was no way that we could have 1, 2, and 3 working. And that is still the situation now. We cannot have 1, 2, and 3 combined. So we set aside 3 for maintenance and repair and for refurbishing, and then worked on 1 and 2. Now, 1 and 2 design of the basins is fitted with coarse diffusers, number 1. And the design of the basins is such that the flow comes in from the top and actually separates out from the top too. While in the case of aeration basin 3, it comes from the top and goes from the bottom. So what happens in the case of 1 and 2 is, just explaining it from a layman's point of view. When it comes from the top and gets separated from the top, gets out from the top, all the solids from aeration basin 1 or 2 get pushed on to the next stage, which is a secondary clarifier. So the solids get pushed out, so the process is not effective at that point of time. So we faced these problems in the month of January and February when there was wet weather season. We had all these solids getting washed into the clarifier and thereafter to the chlorine contact basin and thereafter to the ocean, and we had violations. So therefore, it was a clear writing on the wall that 1 and 2 will not serve the purpose for SAM. That was the same reason, in 1996 or 1998, they took a stand that 1 and 2 should not be used. They kept it aside, and only 3 was, we were allowed to work only on basin 3. So at that point of time, we reached out to go out for a bid, and we got Brown and Caldwell working on it. So it's very clear that 1 and 2 by itself will not work. We need to do improvements. And 3 by itself will not work because the capacity is not adequate. And therefore, Brown and Caldwell is now working on these combinations where we can, use 1, 2, and 3, or 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I just wanted to make that very clear because questions were being asked as to why we are doing the study. This is in short why we are doing the study, because we've had problems doing only 3 or doing only 1 and 2. So therefore, a change was required. Thank you.
Thanks, Kishan. So I'll just kind of summarize some of the pros and cons about this alternative, and then we'll go to the next one. It provides the most redundancy of the alternatives that we will present. You could use 1 and 2 when you're doing maintenance. So what we're saying there is for short term to take the basins 3 or 4 out. Typically, you need to take the basins out of service to take a look at the diffusers. So we would recommend that. And so that would be a way you could use basins 1 and 2 in the short term while you do that. So you can service 3 and 4. So you have them both ready at all times. It's more efficient. And what I mean by that is, and you know this with the basins 1 and 2 compared to 3, is it's more efficient oxygen or less energy for that type of air delivery system. And then if you want, this is again, is you get more flexibility that you could modify basins 1 and 2 in the future. So it sets you up. So you're not gonna be set out if you do this. So it's kind of like, those are the pros. The cons is just really the additional, as I saw in the cost breakdown, and you mentioned about diffusers. Yeah, you need additional piping that needs to be outfitted in the basins just to be able to do it. But again, that's kind of normal. So that's the cost issue that we talk about, is it's not just the diffusers, but you got to get the piping and the sprays and all that stuff. So that's the disadvantage of it. But I just wanted to show these out, and we'll revisit these 3 together a little bit later, so you can kind of get a context of all these and comparative reasons. So that's done with 1. So I'll go with 2. So what we did here, and someone asked about 1, 2, and 3, and this is the answer. So, but using all 3 of these basins, we still need to do more improvements in each basin to outfit them with fine bubble because of the capacity issue. So what we show in the figure you'll see in red, that represents the improvements or diffusers that we put in. So the scope would, for this type of alternative, would be to modify basins 1 and 2. So you have 1, 2, and 3 together, and they're all in service. So that would be the option. You'd put fine bubble diffusers in the basins. Kishan mentioned some of the flow issues in 1 and 2 with the solids on top and bottom. So we would recommend baffle walls to improve the hydraulics so they treat better. And again, replacing the weir gates that would be needed to do the alternative. So this one's, as you can see, compared to the other ones, a little bit more. And really the breakdown is, I'll show you kind of why it's more expensive. You're putting more diffuser in both of them. They're smaller basins, but you're putting in more diffusers. Baffle walls, that there's an opportunity there where if we do a detailed design, or if someone designs this to reduce that cost, we deferred to concrete walls here, but you might be able to do something a little bit less expensive. And then the demolition costs, I know the previous one was a little bit, there's a lot of demolition that would occur in basins 1 and 2, because we'll have to take out parts of those old coarse bubble diffusers in order to retrofit the fine bubble diffusers. So you have to take out a lot of piping to do that. And then the electrical is, a little bit less, but it's about the same. And then the gates itself are about the same. So this is the breakdown of that alternative. And to reiterate, and the reason I'm going to spend time on these are the two that are kind of the ones we're looking at closely, is alternative 1, you're basically outfitting basin 4 with diffusers and using 1 and 2 as backup. And alternative 2 is going into your old basins 1 and 2 and putting diffusers in those 2 basins so you can allow them to work in series or work in parallel together. So those are the 2 alternatives that we have right now. All right, so pros and cons for this one. So pros is, well, you don't need to use basin 4 for this alternative, at least initially. So you don't have to put some of that money in there, but you basically, the drawback there is you're completely stranding that asset. I mean, it was built, it's a newer basin 4, and you're not using it. So that's not good. Pros is obviously from what you have now, you have a really good increase in capacity. You're going from one basin 3, to being able to run basins 1, 2, and 3. So that's a good thing. And then you're repurposing the existing tanks. So that's, you're trying to keep some of those tanks in service. Now the con is those are old basins. They're like 50 years old, right? So during construction, and I'll get into that, there's a lot of more uncertainty on putting things in that basin than there would be for newer basins. And an example would be if you're trying to put an anchor bolt on the bottom to mount a diffuser. I mean, you run risk unless you look at it more closely, that the concrete could crack or have some issues. So there's some uncertainty there. And then the other one is, compared to alternative 1, you have less redundancy, and that goes back to risks on what you're willing to take when you do that. So those are some of the pros and cons of alternative 2.
Could you really quickly show the resulting capacities of 1 and 2?
Sure.
What you end up with at the end of getting that one graph real quick?
Yeah, I'll go back down there. And this one's, there's a lot in this. So what I wanted to do, Linda will have to help me, obviously, but so right here in the middle is your alternatives 1 and 2. And you'll notice that there's 2 colors, right? So the red is really what basins are in service at the time and what we would recommend. We always recommend some redundancy, right? So what we did here is, so for alternative 2, for all 4 basins, you can see it goes up to 7,000. But in reality, you wouldn't be running your 1 and 2, they're backup. So in reality, that's reality, or that the reliability would be alternative 1 is, and again, this is pounds per day, is 4,480. Now, if you go back to alternative 2, if you do all 3 basins, you get up to 5,500 pounds per day. But in reality, you should be running 2 of the 3. You shouldn't be running all 3, because you need to take basins out occasionally to maintain them. So the redundancy is really important. So this is kind of a snapshot. And again, the black line is kind of where you're at, right? So the problem with running 2 basins is you're kind of on the bleeding edge of keeping your capacity with your average dry weather loading there, the black line. You can see it's just a scotch under it. So, you get a little bit of breathing room with one with two basins compared to alternative two.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. I don't know if there was anything else you wanted to add, Linda, but this is good to kind of go back and forth because I sometimes, it's good to just kind of visually see that. So we'll go to alternative three, which
I don't see any reason to look at alternative three. It costs way more. I don't
Yeah.
think that's really something we're going to evaluate. Let's just
Yeah.
skip it.
Yeah. Well, we'll do
Okay.
3 and 4. Yep. That sounds good to me.
Anyone want to hear?
Yes, I'd like to hear all of them. It helps me to do a better evaluation.
I'll do it quick.
We
I can make it
we
quick,
paid for
Catherine.
this work, and I think
That's true.
we need to know what's involved. Thank you.
I'll be quick. I think it is worthwhile to mention because I think we came in this with some options that's why we look at them and look at costs so we can roll them out. So yeah, I mean, for the punchline, this is expensive, but I'll just put you through real quick because Catherine, you mentioned that, you guys did pay for an analysis and we want to, run it to ground per se. But the punchline it's very expensive. It was a costly endeavor, but we wanted to look at it because one of the theories and one of the issues you have is the settling. So this configuration, alternative 3, is kind of like a hybrid approach. And what you're doing is you're running the flow through basin 2, the old basin, which has been modified, and then it runs through basin 3 and 4. So it's kind of like it's running them in series. 2 and 3 in series is the option if you look at the top. And then tank 4 is the backup.
So can I say something?
Yes, Linda, please.
Okay, so if I was designing a treatment plant like yours, starting from scratch, this is the kind of process I would use. And what we have is a zone at the front that doesn't have any air, that's just mixed. That's what those infinity symbols are there. They're mixers only. And that gives you a lot better settling sludge than the kind of process that you have. 1 and 2, from a process perspective, they're the same kind of process. It's just differences in how much volume you have available. So we wanted to look at this alternative because it might have been a way to really solve some problems with sludge settling. But when we got into it, it was really hard to implement. And that's why the cost got so high, is that there wasn't an easy way to add the selector. Like, we couldn't just put it in basin 3, the dimensions aren't really right. And that would require going into 3. And so when we got to the end of it here, we agree, this was probably more than you want to spend now. Now, in the future, if in 30 years something has changed and you've got a bunch more growth or some new industry comes in that you want to treat the flow from, maybe this is a way to go. And you're not ruling it out. This is something you could do eventually. But that's kind of the background on where this came from.
That's a good point, Linda. I mean, in essence, it would squeeze about as much capacity as you can in the end, but we're not looking for capacity. We just want you to meet your current. So it's just something to keep in mind. And the other comment is, this isn't like you can't do this later. So it's just one of those alternatives where it's like, is this worth now? So thank you, Linda. That was a good premise. So that is, obviously costs are higher. I don't want to spend too much time because obviously we kind of vetted it, but very expensive. Yeah, it looked good at the time, but I'll mention the cons: highest cost. There's some other challenges too we didn't even mention. It's kind of an additional process to add to the operations, so it's just more headache there. Construction's hard, and there's some actually struvite, which we'll get into if we ever want to see a cool picture. But that's the cons. So the other thing is, the pro Linda mentioned was settleability. That's a big challenge for plants. So the better settling it is, the less volume you need for other stuff for settling. So, and it's the highest capacity you can ever gain. So if anything, it's expensive, but it's something, again, in the future, it's probably worthwhile to at least know about it in case someone asks. And then finally, this isn't an alternative, but we looked at it was equalization. And what the premise here is, hey, is there a way to like equalize the flow, and would that help? And what we did is we said, okay, we can take one of your old basins and use it as equalization. And the thought would be, at night, you don't have it very much flow at all. And then during the day, you have a more what's called a diurnal peak or high flow. So the high flows would be put into this basin, and at night you would be able to bring it back and bring it into the front plant. The ideal is it's equalization. It's great for operations. It makes things more stable. You don't need to adjust flow rates of feed pumps and things if it's less of a variable. So it's costly, and we ruled it out because you don't gain any capacity. But we wanted to make sure that you're aware of some of these options that we did. So this one, we did a cost. We went through it, and then kind of ruling through all the other alternatives, we said no. So that one was something that you could use also in addition. So that was ruled out. And this is just a detailed, we went in and looked at this very thoroughly to see if it was possible. It's possible, but it is a challenge. So that's really what this is saying. And we wanted to just delineate the cost to see. And the other thing is you're undoing what was done before. So it just, we looked through this and said, you know what, this is a hassle. It's not worth it. So now we're back to our slides, and it's showing the three alternatives compared to the basin. And I think I've already kind of talked through this, but what Linda mentioned on the right is, yeah, you get the most capacity on that for alternative 3, but it's pretty pricey next to the other ones here. So that's in summary, all the alternatives we looked at. There's quite a bit of modeling that we did just to make sure that we get accurate assumptions as best we can and compare it with all the data that's we've been gathered. And so I wanted to summarize everything here. And what we did here on the left is some things to think about. And then I put this in terms of risks and things like that. And what I did is I put the current configuration for comparative to the alternatives. And the first one on top is kind of the real one, is current treatment capacity to meet current loading. The other alternatives work, but the current is no. And I think that begs the initial question, like, why are we looking at that? Well, this kind of shows you the concern. Redundancy. Obviously, your current didn't have redundancy because when you took it out, you had to switch it over. Alternative 1 has redundancy because you could use basins 1 and 2 as a backup in the interim. Alternative 2 and alternative 3 don't have redundancy. So that means if something's out, you need to really think about what to do. And at treatment plants, it's a good practice to have some redundant either basins or equipment for the very purposes of not violating. The next one is cost. So I just have low, medium, high because you can see the comparative, but alternative 1 is the lowest cost for these alternatives. The next one is construction cost increase. And what that is uncertainty associated with working in old basins doing retrofits. Based on some of the work that we've done in the past on plants, there always seems to be a surprise cost associated with the older basins compared to some of the new basins. So that's kind of a risk that, okay, we give you an estimate, but we don't know, basically. So that's really the big one there for cost. The other one is risk of violation. And really that kind of tempers the treatment capacity as well as redundancy. Without redundancy, you do have risk. So the current is high, and it's obvious because you've had violations. Alternative 1 is low because you have some redundancy. You're meeting the capacity. Alternative 2 is medium, and the reason it's medium is because you don't really have redundancy. So there could be a risk of having something going on with the basin at the same time that you're having some higher loads coming into the plant. And alternative 3 is a little bit lower because of the selector and some of the redundancies there. Construction risk, again, that's related to construction cost increase. There's higher risk for 2 and 3 compared to 1. It's a little bit more straightforward in terms of construction. Operational complexity and risk. 1 and 2 are both low. Alternative 3, because you're adding some additional anaerobic and mixers, it's high. And then finally, maintenance risk. What that is again, looking at, can you take basins out? Is there an issue performing maintenance? And when you're doing the maintenance, do you have a high risk of not having enough basins online to treat what's coming in? So 1 has the lowest for sure because of the redundancy. And then the remaining really don't have that redundancy road that we have. So that I wanted to kind of put a snapshot together of just about everything under the sun, just in case you had any other kind of questions related to some of these alternatives because they're high level. Was there any questions on this before I go on? Don't want to steal the thunder on what we recommend.
I am
But,
curious. After you, Deborah.
I just wanted to say that when I look at these columns here, it doesn't look like there's any good reason not to go with alternative 1 with the exception of redundancy.
That's a good conclusion. And that's kind of what we recommend is alternative 1. And I just feel like the redundancy is a big issue. That's something that the plant's been struggling. Again, the operations done a phenomenal job of keeping 3 for so long without taking it out. It's kind of amazing. But in reality, you're supposed to be taking those bases out every 7 years or so. Just, I mean, that's the manufacturer's recommendation for diffuser maintenance. They also recommend taking them out just to inspect the diffusers in case something wrong. So they've been doing a good job, but the redundancy is a big issue that is important. And it's actually the least cost redundancy because you're actually using 1 and 2 with the least amount of, I'll call you putting Band-Aids on those just to have that as the backup compared to the others. But yeah, that's a good, Deborah, that's a good kind of like punchline is that's what we see. So yeah, so recommendations. Was there any other questions? I'm sorry.
Wait,
I jumped forward.
I have a question. And
Yeah.
what I don't see on your list is cost of operations.
Yeah.
And overall maintenance of the system. And also the other one is simplicity.
Yeah. So we kind of made a decision about cost of operations, and it's not, let's just say it's very similar and close, except for alternative 3 with kind of the simplicity. I think I do have operational complexity and risk as a parameter here. But as far as operational costs, they're all pretty much fine bubble if you think about it. We wouldn't factor in the use of your course bubble like once every 3 weeks. So you have the similar energy costs. The energy cost is going to be the same because it's the same load with fine bubble. So that'll be the same. And so it really you're not going to see a significant difference in that part. So that was the main reason why I didn't include operational costs. You're not going to add staff, so you wouldn't have that. You wouldn't have any differences in, say, chemicals. The maintenance costs would be diffuser replacement, and since they're all diffusers, they'd be the same. So that's the main reason why we didn't go into that level of detail on that.
Okay.
There wasn't significant differences.
Thank you.
Okay.
I have a question. Mike, can you go back to that table which showed loading, the BOD
Yeah.
loading and all that stuff? Yeah. Now, suppose we go for alternative 1. And then considering the existing flow, which is about average dry weather flow is about 1.2, 1.3 mgd, what is the maximum BOD that the plant can absorb without any violation? Average BOD. Is it possible to predict something like that?
Boy, that's a Linda question. I don't know, Linda. Process guru.
Well, I mean, so it's whatever, 7,400 pounds, or do you want it with just 3 and 4 online?
Just alternative 1, 3 and 4 online. Yes.
All
Suppose
right.
we execute that.
Second, I've got to do math,
I know.
and I can't
wanted
do
you
that
to
in
do
my
it.
head.
Yep.
What'd you say the flow was? 1.3?
Yep. Let's take 1.3.
So that gives you 410
So
milligrams.
that
per
is,
liter.
yeah, that's what I'm trying to drive home the point, that it's 410 BODs on average now, and we do not have alternate 1 now. So that is where the gap is. Besides that, we are also having shock loads, which affect the process more than the average BOD loading. Am I right, Linda? Shock loads are the one which cause problems more than an average BOD loading.
Yeah, the shock loads are definitely causing a problem, and potentially other unusual things that are not typical municipal wastewater may be causing problems as well.
Correct. So it's crystal clear that with 410 BOD, which we are getting into the plant now, we are having only aeration basin 3. That would not suffice. So your modeling, your
It's showing, is it 4,100?
So where that came from was this load right here. So 44 or 4,500 pounds per day with 1.3 million gallons of water is 410 milligrams per liter. Now,
Yes.
if I took that and I did put it in 3 million gallons a day, I would get a lower concentration.
correct.
I'm
So
just trying to put it on this chart.
yeah,
Yeah,
so
he's asking something that's not on this chart.
Oh.
correct.
That comes
Yeah.
from this number right there.
Exactly. So what I'm asking Barbara is to clarify your question is what we report every time to the board and what we are talking about on a daily basis is a BOD, which is in milligrams per liter. So their chart is depicting on pounds per day, considering like what Linda mentioned earlier, the flow and the load in milligrams per liter. So I was trying to work backwards saying that with the flow that we've got, what is the BOD in milligrams per liter that can be allowed into the plant if we have alternative 1? So the answer to that was 410 or 420 milligrams per liter, which we are getting into the plant now, but with only 1 basin instead of 3 and 4.
That sounds like a really useful way to look at it. I would love to see a chart that shows that.
We can do that. We can,
Yeah, it's
we
just
can,
converting. Yeah.
yeah, it's confusing, the loading pounds versus concentration. But, when you look at the flow coming in, there's 2 different ways. And it's just as a process person, concentration to me is irrelevant because it's how many pounds, but it's a function of both the concentration and flow. So there's a few different ways of presenting it. Apologize for the confusion there.
I've been pushing loading in pounds per day as the way to talk about this. And the reason I've been doing that is because it sort of separates out this water conservation problem or this water conservation thing that we have going on in California. I've been in plants, I was in a plant and they said our capacity is 10. But when their capacity was really 10,000 pounds per day, and they were at 10,000 pounds per day at a flow of 7. And so by changing that, kind of number around and really focusing on pounds, we're focusing on what actually is the limiting factor. So I don't really care if that 5,000 or 4,500 pounds is in 1.3 mgd or 3 mgd. I just care that there's 4,500 pounds per day. So I know that's confusing and it's going to take a little while to kind of get
I would
that.
really like to understand that. I'd really like to understand what the problem is. I'm not objecting to, I think this is a very good, my compliments on the analysis. I think you've done a great job, but I really feel as if we also need to understand why what we have now is causing the problem. Anyway, let's move on. Sorry.
Yeah,
that's a good question.
Mike, there's a question from Director Roddick.
Yeah.
So what is the metric that regulators focus on when they consider BOD?
So in the effluent, they're looking at a concentration, but the way activated sludge plants work, that concentration is really premised on, are you settling your sludge? And every plant has the same effluent concentration requirements basically for BOD. And so the challenge, the problem that you're having in terms of loading is that you've got enough pounds of organic matter coming in that your basins just aren't big enough to treat it. It means the concentration that to fully treat that, you end up with too high of a concentration and then you overwhelm the secondary clarifiers. There's a lot of pieces that all have to come together to look at this. We also looked at how much air you had, because in order to treat that many pounds of BOD, you also have to have enough air in the system. And the air didn't turn out to be the limiting factor in your case. It was more just that in order to treat it, you needed to have so many bugs in your aeration basins that you didn't have enough, the clarifiers couldn't treat it then. So there's this balance between those.
Okay, so I have a follow-up question. So would we be doing something like this as an alternative to managing source and the collection systems? Like, by doing one of these projects, are we relieving the individual agencies from dealing with the inputs from their collection systems? Is that what we're trying to do here, is not have to do it in the collection systems?
No. So as we, we were asked to really take sort of a fresh look at this, right? And our analysis says that just using aeration basin 3, even with the loads you've had in the past, is a risky thing to do. That's not the way plants are typically designed, and you're setting yourself up when there's always variations in flow and loading. And so, based on what you've got coming in now, you really need to have another basin or a little bit more volume that you can use routinely. And that will give the operators that ability to adjust to whatever happens. Now, the issues in the collection system are far more extreme than this. There were values over 7,000 per day of BOD. So there were values off the top of this chart. That's what you need to solve, as well as making sure there's nothing that's toxic or interfering with the process.
So a project like this would not solve the problem at the collection system level. We have to attack the problem on both ends.
Yeah,
Fortunately, yeah, you do.
yeah.
Thank
All
you.
right. Do we have more questions?
And I
have
have a question. You're talking about the design of the plant now. When the plant was designed 40 some years ago, was it designed in keeping with those standards? And so what we're looking at in this need for this remodel, so to speak, of the plant, we're looking at updated regulatory standards and as well as engineering standards, ?
So the regulatory treatment requirements haven't changed. What the effluent has to be is still the same as it was at that point. From what we can tell, and some of the design documents are a little short of information that we would often find in design documents, but from what we can tell, the capacity was designed assuming basins 1, 2, and 3 were all operating together. And so that rating for the plant is for all 3 of those basins in service. Now, the plant has found that they can't actually do that because of some of these flow splitting issues, and basins 1 and 2 really just don't work very well when they are used. So that means that your plant rating is a lot higher than you can really effectively do right now. So when we divide that out, I think we've used slightly different assumptions than the original designers may have used about how sludge settles and exactly how the system operates. And part of that's because they didn't document what they did, and we used sort of the standards that or we put in place now. So we might not get exactly the same number, but I think even the original designers would probably say that you should be operating more than just basin 3 with current loadings.
So
Barbara?
the plant was designed under some inoperable assumptions about running all 3 basins simultaneously.
I don't really know the history.
Yeah.
It may have been that when the plant started up, those gates were functional enough to split the flow, and it would have been possible. but basins 1 and 2 probably didn't work as well, and so they didn't use them. And then if you've got to maintain, sometimes things like that just don't work. Mike,
Yeah,
I don't know if you have any farther, more info.
There's a difference between design and operations,
yeah, and
theoretical and practical.
right. So, could it have worked in 1998 or whenever it was with 3 basins in service? Maybe, but it can't today, and we have to start from where we are now.
So
This is very helpful.
in effect, you're saying that the past 21 years is a huge, we should be complimenting our staff on making this thing work as well as it has for the past 18 or so years.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. And I think unfortunately last fall, you just kind of got past that point where even
tipping
heroic
point.
efforts could keep it going.
Okay, thank you.
Barbara?
Rick,
Yeah.
I can't see
first-
everybody. Should we go
first one-
back to full screen?
Oh, yeah. Would that help?
Can we
I
go
could,
off screen share so I can see who
yeah.
wants to talk?
Let me kill that. Yeah.
Yes, stop
good
sharing
plan.
the screen. Yep, that's good.
Okay.
Who wanted to speak? Rick. It sounded like Rick.
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to agree with Director Ruddick on the thing. When we're talking this BOD issue, we need to look at how to clean it up better, but you also have to look at the source. That's pretty clear to me. My big concern is that we're talking, at least with the 30% markups and all that in the future, well over $1 million to any solution here. This is addressing possibly an immediate issue that we need to fix, but this doesn't do anything for some other problems, like the fact that all of our electronics are below sea level. We have no process for sea level rise at this point, and all the agencies are looking at and needing recycled water at this point. So my concern is, I personally want to spend a minimum amount of money patching a 40-year-old building that gets older every day. And I want we may need to make some emergency repairs to get out of this BOD issue, but we need to look at the big picture, which is how are we going to get recycled water? How are we going to clean up all the other issues, sea level rise? It was an estimate, I think, of more than $1 million to move all the electronics. At some point, for getting new systems in, which can cut down on outfall to the ocean, there are billions of dollars in grants out there. And we need to keep looking at the big solution, which is to move to newer technologies and also solving all these other problems at the same time. And whatever combination of plants that may be, we can start looking at. But just continually patching this plant is just going to be, it's not throwing money away, because we need to do some things. But we also need to solve the big problem, which is we don't have recycled water. We need to do something to save the plant with sea level rise and all of those other issues. So we need to keep looking at the big picture as we're talking about spending millions and millions of dollars on all these other projects too at the same time.
I agree with Rick. I think he makes an important point, and I was going to raise this issue during director's reports, but I was at a conference call last week, and somebody in Washington, D.C. is pretty certain that the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change, is going to presume 2 feet of sea level rise by 2030. So not 2050 and not 2100, 2030, leaving us, 8+ years to deal with that. So this is a more urgent issue for sure, because the Thwaites Glacier in Antarctica is on an unstoppable path to fall into the Southern Ocean with great effect. So.
Well, I think we should reinstate the committee that Rick and I started about looking at longer range plans, but we need to fix our BOD problem now because this other stuff is going to take a while and we don't want to be racking up violations while we're dreaming about the future.
So I think at this point, the plan is not for us to have a vote on this tonight, but to bring it back at our next meeting with some more staff information and really take a look at supporting one of the alternatives next at our next meeting.
Okay, understood.
I do have one more question, which is one of the things in your report that I really liked was all these charts that you, I don't know if you can see it. No, you can't see it. Showing the water quality data and the BOD information, but the key is just really too hard to understand. Things have a lot of acronyms and so forth. So I wonder if there's a way to explain what all these charts are a little better. I'm going to get rid of that. Rather than, all right, here's one of the charts, the keys at the bottom. I would like to have those charts that we could look at, which really give us a lot of information about what's been going on at our plant. If I wonder if there's a way you could expand the keys so that we could get more information from them.
Yeah,
Is
we
that
can.
possible?
Yeah, I think one thing is, you know, there's a lot packed in those data, so you're right, kind of uncoupling it. But we can kind of like take a look at the legends and see if we can make them a little bit easier to understand with some comments on those charts. But that's definitely something we can look at.
That would be really
the
helpful
final.
if we could do that. I
Yeah.
think that would be easy. And is everyone okay with having a final look at this at our next meeting?
Yes.
I certainly would like to have a discussion with our general manager about it.
Maybe some requests
Sure.
if there's information, additional information that you would like to have before we take a final look at this, whether we want to authorize this. Now, Kishan, how would this work in terms of the budgeting process? If we want to, for example, select and support alternative 1, that is not currently in the CIP for this current fiscal year, how would you propose to handle that?
No, correction. It is in the CIP for this current fiscal year. It has been approved by the board, but we are not yet ready with actual costs. What we've got is only estimated costs from Brown and Caldwell. So we haven't reached out to the suppliers. We do not have accurate costs. So we are not yet ready. We'll bring it back to the board at a later stage. But what I'd like some direction from the board right now is staff's recommendation was to file and accept the report from Brown and Caldwell. I would like to get information from the board, may not be today, but from all the 3 agencies at a later date as to what additional information you would like in the report, which you would want Brown and Caldwell to work on it and bring it back to the next meeting. If you could discuss it with your general managers or your staff, and then send it in writing to me saying this report needs X, Y, Z, something to be added. We'll get that added by Brown and Caldwell, and when they're ready, we can bring it back to the board. Does that sound okay?
Yep. Anyone have any concerns with that? That seems good. I agree that we need to deal with this quickly. So I think if we can pull this together and get the information we need by the next meeting, that makes sense.
So moved to accept the report.
Second.
Okay. All right. Do we have a roll? Do we need a roll call for that, or can we?
Well, I thought aren't we revising it and bringing it back, or?
Yes.
No, we're
Normally you wouldn't
accepting. I thought we were accepting this report, just filing it.
How
Oh,
about
really?
subject to revisions?
There you
Okay.
go.
And do we need a roll call? We have a motion and a seconder accept the change in the motion.
Yep.
Okay. I guess we need a roll call.
Okay. Director Slater Carter,
Aye.
Director Penrose,
Yes.
Director Clark,
Aye.
Director Lohman,
Yes.
Director Radek,
Yes,
Chair Dye.
Yes. All right, moving on.
Okay.
Next, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much to Brown and Caldwell for all your hard work on this, and we really appreciate you bringing this information to us.
Yep.
Yeah,
thank
your
you.
pleasure. Thank you.
Thank
Guys,
you
have
very
a
much.
good evening.
Okay,
Thank you.
you too. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to approve side letter agreement with the International Union of Operating Engineers, Local 39, regarding extension of 2019-23 Memorandum of Understanding through January 31st, 2025. Okay, Kishan.
Yes. So just some background information. During the last few months, maybe more than a year or so, all of us have experienced dramatic changes in our work and personal lives, which were unanticipated and unimaginable. This pandemic has brought many challenges, and you all know that staff has gone above and beyond. They are valuable members of the team. When people were scared to come out in public, our staff was required to attend to service calls, and only during daytime, not only during daytime, but also during the middle of the night. And this is besides taking care of their routine work during normal business hours. Our operators ensured the plant running as we are essential services. The staff worked round the clock to ensure compliance and safety for themselves as well as the community. Therefore, in recognition of the strong commitment, hard work, and dedication of staff, SAM and Local 39 recently met and discussed the parties' willingness to extend the current MOU for an additional 2 years, that is through January 31st, 2025, a 3% salary increase in July 2023, a 3% salary increase in July 2024, and a one-time payment of $2,000 to each Local 39 represented employee. This once again demonstrates staff's ongoing commitment to SAM, and it will ensure the continuity of our operations through 2025. Therefore, the General Manager recommends that the board approve the proposed side letter agreement and extension of the MOU until January 2025. Any questions?
So moved.
Second,
All those in favor?
Roll
Can
call.
we have a roll call, please? No, I'm sorry. Any further discussion? Got to do that.
Did you have some question, Director Penrose? Okay, I thought you raised your hand, sorry.
No, it's fine. I think this is a good deal for Sam, that we're getting the contract extension, and we're also recognizing the hard work of all our employees. So, can we have a roll call?
Did we have a motion and a second?
We did.
Yes.
Okay, Director Slater Carter?
aye. And thank you to the staff for your dedication and hard work in these tough times. You guys are remarkable.
I see Director Clark's raised his hand.
Oh, I don't have my hand up.
Okay, your symbol is up. Okay. Okay,
It
roll
is?
call. I go with the roll call. Director Slater Carter?
Aye.
Director Penrose?
And I'd like to echo what Catherine Slater Carter said about the staff. Bless you all. Thank you all. We are so grateful that you're there every day, every night, taking care of business. We need you and we are grateful. Thank you.
Director Clark?
Aye, and I would similarly like to thank the staff for doing their jobs no matter what, and also Christopher for designing this extension for us.
Thank you. Director Lohman?
Yes to all those thanks also.
Director Radok?
Ditto to all of the above.
Excellent. Chair Dye?
Yes, and I'd also like to say, I don't know that the community realizes that we have staff that often have to come out in the middle of the night to deal with things, and they really have gone above and beyond, and we appreciate them very much. Yes.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to a similar item, which is set salary and terms and conditions of employment for unrepresented employees, and approve unrepresented employees' salary schedule. And this is essentially the same as the previous item, but for unrepresented employees?
Yeah, let me elaborate it a little further. So based on the agreement reached with Local 39 for a 3% increase in salary and a one-time payment of $2,000 to each employee, board consideration is requested to grant the same increase to the unrepresented employee, which is only one person, finance officer. I would like to mention here that the finance officer has gone above and beyond during the pandemic times. When people all over the world were working from home, our finance officer had to work in his office, groping through accounts and books, and was able to complete 3 financial audits in a record time of 1 year. As you all know, it is difficult to complete even 1 audit in 1 year, and completing 3 was remarkable, and it showed his exemplary dedication and commitment to SAM. Therefore, the general manager recommends that the board consider approval of 3% cost of living adjustment and a one-time payment of $2,000 for the authority's unrepresented employee, which is only the finance officer, in order to achieve equity and to recognize the finance officer's exceptional efforts over the past year, which warrants this adjustment. Thank you, and staff is here to answer any questions.
So move.
Is there a
Second.
second? I have to say,
Second.
I like George. I think he does a great job. Anyone else want to, I guess a roll call and everyone can comment. Is there further discussion? Let's have a roll call and people can comment when they vote.
Director Slater Carter,
Thank you, George. Yes.
Director Penrose,
Aye.
Director Clark,
Aye.
Director Lohman,
Yes.
Director Roddick,
Yes, thank you, George.
Chair Dye.
Yes, and I worked with George on a number of issues this year, and I have to say we're very lucky to have him. And he does it, works really hard and does a great job. So thank you, George. All right,
Thank you.
moving on
I'd have to say
set
that was
by-
the longest 2 minutes I've had to sit through.
What, did you think we were going to turn you down? We think you're great, George. All right, D, set biweekly employee salary schedule, effective July 1, 2021.
Yeah, this is just compiling what we discussed in the last 2 items on the agenda. So in requirement with the Title II of the California Code of Regulations, which is section 570.5, we required that the pay schedule of every CalPERS agency be approved and adopted by the agency's governing body pursuant to public meeting law. And therefore, the complete biweekly wage schedule, which we discussed earlier for unrepresented employees for the 3% increase, and the present MOU, which has already been approved a couple of years back, all have been put together in one sheet in order for the board to approve. So nothing, no change. It's just that it's being brought to the board for approval. Any questions?
So move.
Second, do we have a second?
Second,
Any further discussion? Do we have a roll call, please?
Director Slater Carter,
Aye.
Director Penrose,
Aye.
Director Clark,
Aye.
Director Lohman,
Yes.
Director Roddick,
yes.
Chair Dye.
Aye.
Motion
Okay.
passed.
Moving on to general manager's report.
Okay, we have the complete packet, like what we normally do during the second meeting of the month. The details are all there, and if there are any questions, staff is here to answer those questions.
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead, please, Director Clark.
I noticed what seems to be an anomaly on, it shows up on page 205 of the staff of the packet. In June 11th, and 12th, the GCSD flow is shown as very close to 0. And that can't be. And I wonder, do we know what happened?
I was wondering if why you think that can't be.
Well, I don't think everybody went away for those 2 days and didn't flush the toilet once.
So what happened is during that time we were experiencing one of the upsets, and we were retaining flow out in the storage facilities out there for 2 days, And yeah, I noticed it too. And I looked at all the numbers and looked at everything. And you'll see there's a little bit of a spike after that because the flows went from those days and they sort of got transferred over to the following days. So yeah, I mean, I looked at everything back and forth and over, and the only thing that I could find is it was during that period where we were extending the amount of time when we were retaining flow out in the wet weather storage facilities.
Thanks, Tim. I should have thought of that myself. Do you know, were the new 200,000 gallons utilized during those 2 days? So all 400,000?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah, I could answer that question, Tim. The way the new 200,000 gallons works is both the new and the old fill up concurrently. So it's not like one gets filled up and then the second one kicks in. So does that answer your question?
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, I had a similar question, but my other part of the question, I saw in the text that you were holding it back then, but I don't understand why the flows went for Half Moon Bay went up at the same time. I mean, it's not a percentage of the flow, it's gallons. So why did the flow for Half Moon Bay go up so much when the flow is being held back for El Granada?
I'm trying to think because I don't have the flow report right in front of me. Part of it is percentage based, and that doesn't help.
To the key, it's not percentage based according to the key.
Well, and yeah, I know. I looked at all the numbers, and I remember I talked to Kishan about it, and we looked at them, and we I mean there were no anomalies that we could see anywhere in any of the flow meter or any of the flow patterns, other than the fact that we had the flow storage at the Baker tanks. I mean, the overall for the monthly was, you know, not too far out of the norm. So I don't know.
Okay. I mean, I'm not really worried about it. And then I just wanted to say the other thing that in GCSD, the service calls were all about excessive amounts of toilet paper in the main. And I wonder if that was toilet paper or wipes, but that seems to be causing a problem these days, maybe with the lower amount of water use. So
Yeah, it's pretty much that's exactly what it is. A lot of the lower flow toilets where it's half a gallon per flush or something like that, and some of the residents, some of the call outs, I know for a fact some of the call outs, they were either very near the end of the line or they were the second house to the end of the line, so there's just not enough flow for all the solids and paper to carry everything down the sewer lines. I mean, as you know, sewer lines are designed to flow at a rate of 2 feet per second. So if you're carrying down a long distance and you only have half a gallon of water, you're not going to achieve 2 feet per second, and everything's going to settle out. And that's what we see happening. And Linda even referred to that earlier. That's what we see happening, you know, all over the place.
Thank you. Anything further on the general manager's report? Moving on to attorney's report.
Yes, good evening, everyone. I have just I had one item that we included in your packets, and it was a follow-up on the June 28th board meeting where there was a discussion about the reopening of the state and the potential to transition back to either hybrid or kind of regular board meetings. Some agencies have done that. And so there was a request from the board to provide some additional analysis and discussion of potential options. And so the staff report I provided kind of goes through the three different options because of the governor extended through September 30th, the ability for agencies to meet like we are tonight. That can occur through September 30th, and it's possible the governor will extend it even further, although I have not heard he's going to. But so we just needed some guidance as to what was the board's direction. Do we want to continue as we are now? Is there a desire for a hybrid approach or a return to board meetings?
Can you explain how a hybrid approach would work?
Sure. Yeah. The hybrid approach is the hardest. I've got one agency who's doing it right now, and it's difficult because you have to manage Zoom and potentially telephone call in, both for directors and for the public. But it can be done. So you'll have some of the directors would be present physically and some aren't. Some are participating virtually like we have here. So one of my agencies that has a 10-member board, the last board meeting, we had 4 directors present and I think 5 participating virtually, and one was absent. So under the current framework, we're able to do that. The challenge for staff on that is just logistically difficult because you have to manage, people, presentations are still done, you're still sharing presentations, but you need to have it so that people who are physically present are able to see those and interact with those present information as well. So it can be done, but it's not easy.
Could we
Well,
make a recommendation?
given, oh,
for
go
what
on,
the-
Barbara.
I was just going to say, could we get someone to look at, we're not the only people facing this, and it seems like there must be solutions out there. And could we get someone to look at the question of how we could? It seems like a really good way to include the public and sometimes the directors. And if there's a way to figure out how to do that, I'm not sure we're the ones to try. We should try to reinvent the wheel. I think we're not. Other people have done it, so that's my thought. Anyone else?
I agree with you, Barbara. My own personal preference is I would like to keep it remote as long as possible, with all, and just run it this way as best we can. I think the hybrid is also good, and maybe the way that can be accomplished is with digitally, with everyone having an iPad or something that they can use or supplied by the district. And because I think it's very useful to not have our consultants have to come all the way to Half Moon Bay to do a presentation. And I like the fact that it is recorded on Zoom and easily available. And frankly, it's easier to see all the people who are participating in the meeting on Zoom too. So going back to the old way, I'm not going to vote for it at this point in time. I think it's cumbersome, and the commute times are just, they eat up time. Some live closer, but some of us have and some of us have a shorter commute, and you, Jeremy, have the longest commute.
I do indeed. Yeah.
So can we look into someone who could, Rick, go ahead.
Yeah, my comments were sort of that I sent into Kishan were based on the assumption that after September 30th, moving into October, that we would be forced the board would be forced to go into a meeting room. And sort of piggybacking what Catherine said, if the local servers can handle it, all the board members could either bring in their laptops, iPads, so they would physically be in the meeting, but also be Zooming. If people come in, they can see all the board members live. Zoomers can see all the people live. Consultants, as far as I'm concerned, could Zoom too, and I would prefer that. The big issue seemed to be if public shows up, they would need to see the presentation on a screen. So that to me was the problem. How does, and maybe no one would ever show up at a meeting if they could Zoom. The public isn't forced to go there, but if they do show up at the meeting, there has to be a projection of what everybody's talking about so they can see that also.
Big screen TVs are pretty cheap.
Yeah.
But it seems like there must be some people who are an expert at this, and we could just pay somebody to tell us some specific alternatives. We could do this, or you could do this, we could do this, rather than us trying to figure out how to do it.
I'm not ready to come to meetings in person.
Yeah, I suggest we wait until we get closer to September 30th with the mask mandates being on or off. I'm not even sure what they are right now.
They're changing
And
by the day.
exactly. So I would prefer not to spend any money until other people iron this out and we can just pay them the highest compliment possible by copying them.
I think
Yeah.
Zoom has been great. I like Zoom. I don't want to change
I don't
at
wanna change.
all ever again.
Well, I can't promise that, but until September 30th, you can continue on in the current format. One of the things that is going to be just what I've experienced with where you have multiple people in the same room using Zoom is that the signals will interfere with each other and you wind up having echoes. And so there are some real IT challenges with that, although it can be done. Again, that's where you get smart IT people who know how to do it. But yeah, I mean, there's agencies that are doing it, but it sounds like from what I'm hearing from the board, it sounds like there's a desire, at least for now, to kind of continue on with the current path. One thing that will likely happen in September is the board will probably have to be physically present. How we want to interface with the public, I think there's more flexibility on that. You know, do we want to have Zoom capability? Do we want to have call-ins? In the past, agencies have done videoing of meetings, but not necessarily in the same kind of interactive way that we have here. So that could be something that Sam could think about. If the board members are physically present, how would we want to interface with the public? And that's, you know, that's something where maybe a consultant could potentially provide some advice on how to do that.
Okay. Everybody happy with that as a resolution? Okay.
For now.
Well, in that case, I suggest that for the CSDA conference at the end of August, and any League of Cities conference, we all lobby those organizations to allow remote board member participation and not force us to go into a board meeting too.
Well, you still can. As it stands right now, you can do teleconferencing. The issue is you'd have to post separately and allow the public, you know, if you do it from your house, you'd have to allow the public to come to your house and post an agenda outside your door.
Well, as long as they bring their own iPad, that's fine. They can stand outside and watch the meeting.
Well, no, they'd be in with you, but that's
Then they
some
have to
people
bring
don't normally
food.
like that, but that's you know, that's an option as the law stands right now.
Yeah.
Well, I do think at some point we should probably have someone who has some expertise in these issues.
Yeah.
got
Let's see what happens on the recall, because September 30 is after the recall.
But it's right before the
True.
recall. We're going to need to figure something out before then, I think.
Well, there is legislation that's pending. By September 30th, we'll know whether it's passed. Right now, the main legislation that would change things, that would only affect cities and counties over 250,000 people, which really wouldn't affect us.
Continue.
There are a couple other bills, but they more confirm that the existing executive order is lawful and that it's appropriate. And I'm not sure that moves the dial much. So nothing I've seen so far is going to significantly change the requirement to come back and have in-person meetings, or at least teleconference meetings where the public is able to go to teleconference locations and participate.
All right. Well, we should finish this up because we have a number of closed session items.
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeremy, for your report. Anything further on this? All right, then let's adjourn to, do we have any topics for future board consideration? Nope.
Yes, I'd like us to consider hiring someone, a consultant, or working with Townsend, maybe hiring Townsend, to get us a grant for really looking at big changes as outlined by Director Lohman.
Okay, let's put
Okay.
I think that's great. Let's put it on the next agenda. Anyone object? Good. Anything else?
Do we have director's reports?
I have a director's report.
I do too.
So does Deborah.
Sorry. Yes, sorry. I had already turned the page. Director's reports.
Deborah, you go first.
So for those of you who participate in sort of local CSDA chapter meetings. One shoreline, which is the San Mateo County Flood and Sea Level Rise Resiliency District. Our executive is going to speak to the local chapter about what One Shoreline does and what our projects are. But, you know, as I was thinking about this, I've totally forgotten the date. It's this week. I think it might be Wednesday. For those of you who track CSDA, that's going to be an agenda item.
Good. I'd like to say I wanted to thank Keishan. I was invited to get a tour of the Portola pump station and the new odor control system that is being considered. It's awesome. It's teeny and it appears to be very effective. I remember when they gave us the presentation at the board meeting, and it's going to be a trial run for the next month. So if people are interested, I suggest that you take advantage of this. One of the things it's also being used on is indoor pot greenhouses, because it's a sanitation agent and it does stop the odor. It's called Vapex. Thank you, Michelle, for posting that. And Michelle Dragony went on the tour with me as well. It was just fascinating. Thank you, Angelo. You just know that system so well. But it's a fascinating biochemistry application, and it's essentially simple and quiet. And not particularly expensive. So I would highly recommend folks can go and watch it, or you'll probably be able to read about it on Coastside Buzz, but it's not the same as seeing it.
Yes, I did the tour as well, and I'm very impressed by it. It's going to cost about $130,000 a year if we decide to implement it, and it seems to do a great job. So very impressive, and thank you, Kishan, for finding that and giving it a test.
Thank you.
Anything further before we move to closed session? All right. Good night.
I need to go get some water, so I'll be back.
Okay. I'd like to thank all staff who've been present for the entire meeting.
Yes, indeed. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you very much.
Sonia. Thank you, George. Thank you, Jeremy will be with us. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Susie. Thank you, Felipe. Thank you, Angela. Thank you, TJ.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Good night.
We're now moving to closed session at